Hello, everybody here in the plenary room, and hi to everybody who's tuning in online. I am Brandi Stewart, Program Officer for the Arts at Doris Duke Charitable Foundation. And I am also honored to be one of the co-chairs of this year's planning committee for the GIA 2022 annual conference. Whether you attended virtual and pre-conference sessions over the past few days or just joined us today, I hope your GIA experience so far has exceeded expectations. Thank you for making the kickoff to this year's conference full of energy, heart, and joy. The Planning Committee spent a long time together really thinking about how to make this conference experience worthy of a reunion. And as a New Yorker born and bred, I'm so excited that this gathering of this wonderful, supportive community is in the place that I and GIA call home. Speaking of where we are, before we start the program for this afternoon, I want to offer a land acknowledgement that the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation uses to recognize the land that we're on. Our gathering is located on the traditional lands of the Lenape, Manhattan, Canarsie, Shinnecock, Munsee, Matinecock, Setauket, Unkachog, Montaukett, and other tribes, as well as the home of many of their descendants. For generations, prior to its present-day skyscrapers and inhabitants, Native Americans protected this land. We recognize, honor, and respect their historical and contemporary presence and welcome their future generations. Today, we'll be welcoming keynote speaker, NEA Chair Dr. María Rosario Jackson, for what I know will be an important and engaging conversation about the state of our field and an opportunity to better organize across public and private grant-making. We'll have time for a limited Q&A. For those who are in the room, you may have seen yellow Post-its on your chairs. Those are for questions. If you do not have a pen, there are some stations on either side of the ballroom and in the back where you can grab a pen. We'll try to take as many as we can, and later on, someone will be coming around to collect the questions. But first, I am happy and honored to invite New York City Department of Cultural Affairs Commissioner Laurie Cumbo to the stage to really welcome everybody to New York City.
Good afternoon. Come on, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to New York City. Right? Let me hear you make some noise today. We are excited in New York City to welcome this incredibly important conference to our city. It's an honor and a privilege to greet you as your Commissioner of the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and I'm so excited about what this particular convening is going to mean for our cultural sector. This is a huge opportunity right now. I don't want to say post-pandemic, because we are still reeling with so many of the challenges that have been brought forward, but this is an incredible opportunity. If we just look around in this room, we understand that there is so much happening, from the Black Lives Matter movement to the Me Too movement, to seeing more women elected to office than any other time ever in history. We are seeing changes in terms of the recognition of our Native American people. We are seeing so much growth and development. And while we have all of this change, the individuals in this room, you have the ability, you have the power and the potential to be able to realize how to take our country and our nation and thereby this world forward in a new direction. COVID-19, as well as the movements that arose from this particular, I would say, challenge, but it has now become an opportunity, has given us that time and that wake-up call to how can we do things differently. We can no longer sit on the sidelines. We can no longer do things on the fringes. We have to create that dynamic change from the inside out. And that's why this moment is so important. We cannot allow for us to go along with business as usual. When I was formerly I'll always be a founder, but when I was running a not-for-profit institution that I founded, the Museum of Contemporary African Diaspora and Arts, I often found that the grant-making world was an ivory tower somewhere. It was something that as a not-for-profit organization, a young 22-year-old woman who wanted to build a Black art museum in Brooklyn, New York, that funding world was something that was inaccessible to me. It wasn't something that I felt that I could just easily access. Many people would say, you've got to go to those dinners where they're like $10,000 a plate if you want to meet the right funders and board members to attract to your organization. That was a heavy lift for a 22-year-old with student loans from NYU who was still living at home with her parents trying to make a way with a new museum. I challenge all of you today in this process to be able to break down those ivory walls. How do we get to the communities that we want to engage and we want to serve? How do we make ourselves more accessible? And then when I came to become a city council member, and I was then sitting on the other side of that table, I wanted to make sure that I provided that level of service. I remember organizations would come to me and I would ask them, why didn't you apply to the Department of Cultural Affairs for the last 2 years? Why didn't you apply to our office? And they said, we just wanted to take like some time off. We just wanted to regroup. And I would say, oh, that means you didn't submit your audit for the last 2 years. Is that right? And they were like, well, you know, we had a few little hiccups with our audits. And I was like, because you didn't submit your board minutes that go along with the audit because you didn't have meetings? And they're like, all right, okay, all right. Yeah, everything is not working right now. We didn't submit the audit. The board's in shambles. Like, we have to create that space where organizations can say, I need help. I need support. We can't continue to allow them to say, right? We can't continue to allow them to come with their best face forward. This is the perfect organization with the perfect board of directors, and we're doing everything so perfectly. And because it's been presented to you so perfectly, you should want to support our organization. We have to be that support system. We have to help those organizations find those board members and recruit board members. We have to help those organizations that may have auditing or accounting issues that just can't take it to the next level because of those challenges. We need to help those organizations recognize that they have so many talents to give but have trouble marketing. We have to then put our arms around those organizations in a very big way. And that's really the charge. How can we do more than just giving money and resources? Although giving money and resources is incredibly important, I don't want to understate that. But we also have to match that funding and resources with the social, political, business, financial expertise that many of your organizations come from. I also want at this time in the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, something that I'm really proud of that we were able to do. We were able to raise our floor from $5,000 for a grant to $10,000. So everybody applying to the Department of Cultural Affairs will now at the ground level receive a $10,000 grant. We've also been able to increase our budget cycle so that now New York City's Mayor, Eric Adams, and I work collaboratively together to make sure that we approved and passed the largest budget in New York City's cultural history, making sure that we do not just give lip service to the fact that art and culture is going to lead us through this pandemic, but that we put the money and the resources behind that very goal. And so I'm very proud that we were able to pass a budget of over $500 million, including capital and expense money for New York City cultural institutions. And we were able to provide capital resources for organizations that traditionally never had funding before, like the Hip Hop Museum in the Bronx. We were able to support the National Black Theater in Harlem. We were able to open up, just very recently, the Louis Armstrong House. So many institutions that were kept at the sidelines, on the peripherals, are now at center stage in New York City because we recognize that our cultural diversity is where our greatest strength lies. So, I have the incredible honor of introducing the woman of the hour. I was excited to know that she was going to be here, but then when I found out that I was actually going to get the opportunity to introduce Dr. María Rosario Jackson, I was thrilled. I had an opportunity to meet with her at the Department of Cultural Affairs, and I was sitting across the room and thinking, this dynamic, incredible, multi-talented, African-American, Mexican woman is sitting next to me, the African American woman commissioner of the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and together combined, these two women are chairs of the largest agencies in the country, distributing and manifesting funding for all of these organizations across the country. I was like, wow, we've made history. We've made incredible strides in history. To see these two dynamic women of color in positions of power, providing resources and opportunities for so many organizations across the country. And it's not only the resources, it is also the visual presence. It inspires so many others from across this country to know that their culture is valuable, that it's meaningful, and that it is appreciated and will be celebrated, but most importantly, funded here in this country. For more than 25 years, Dr. María Rosario Jackson's work has focused on understanding and elevating arts, culture, and design as critical elements of healthy communities. Her work blends social science and arts and humanities-based approaches to comprehensive community revitalization, systems change, the dynamics of race and ethnicity, and the roles of arts and culture in those communities. After confirmation by the U.S. Senate in December 2021, Dr. Jackson became the 13th chair of the National Endowment for the Arts in January 2022. With this historic appointment, Dr. Jackson is the nation's first NEA chair to be an African American and Mexican American woman. Give it up for that. Dr. Jackson has a long career in strategic planning, policy research, and evaluation with philanthropy, government, and nonprofit organizations. She has served as an advisor on philanthropic programs and investments at national, regional, and local foundations. A graduate of the University of California, Los Angeles, with a doctorate in urban planning, Dr. Jackson holds a Master of Public Administration degree from the University of Southern California. She lived in Washington, D.C. for 20 years and currently resides in her native Los Angeles with her husband, David Riddick, and in Phoenix, Arizona. I am so proud to be given the opportunity to recognize her incredible accomplishments. She has done so much already to expand the NEA's budget, and you haven't seen anything yet. She is going to make sure that in every single federal agency, they have an arts and cultural policy, and she's going to continue to raise that budget so that all organizations in all mediums all across this country are going to benefit from her leadership in an incredible way. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Dr. Jackson. Woo! Come on, give her a New York and national welcome. That's how we do things. We're in Times Square. Don't get shy now.
Thank you, Laurie, for that warm welcome. That was more than warm. That was the hype. Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. It is really wonderful to be with you today in person on Indigenous Peoples Day, and it's an important reminder that cultural self-determination, dignity, and justice are critical elements of our North Star. So I'm delighted to be with you. I want to thank Eddie Torres. I want to thank Brandi Stewart and Salem Sagai and all of the conference planning committee, and the board of GIA for inviting me to share some thoughts with you today. And I'm honored to have been appointed and serve as chair of the NEA by President Biden. I've been in this position for a little over 8 months now. I started at the very end of January. And it's an interesting time to work from this particular perch. The last 2.5 years, we've already addressed some of this, to say the least, have been challenging. A pandemic, a heightened racial reckoning, and a season of related proclamations to do better, social and political polarization, global instability, environmental challenges, and the arts as a whole and segments within the arts sector have been especially hard hit. And it continues to be, I think, an extraordinary time full of trials and sometimes tragedy, but also evidence of strength and resilience, flexibility, and possibility. And in so many ways, our personal and professional lives, in those, we've been challenged to question what we've held as orthodoxy, what we may have thought of as not negotiable. And at our best, our creativity, imagination, generosity, and ability to be nimble have allowed us to respond, adapt, and step up. Hopefully, in the process, we've honed our ability to discern, to see things more clearly, to understand what is essential and what is not. I think in this time when many of us have the opportunity, the moral obligation, the mandate to reset, we have to be intentional about not just snapping back to some romanticized notion of what was pre-pandemic, and I heard Laurie give voice to that as well. So as we guide investments, make policies, design programs, it's imperative to take stock and figure out what we've learned, what we have known and has been affirmed, and what has been challenged or even debunked. So while I'm in an ongoing process of taking stock, as many of you are, I'm sure, I'm happy to share with you some things that I feel pretty certain about and some things that guide my work from this purge. So the first is that the ability for all people to make sense of the world and be expressive on their own terms, what we do through art and culture, this is a key element of justice and equity. Secondly, arts and cultural activity happens in many kinds of places and can't be limited to only professional production for consumption. Third, art process can be as important, or in some cases even more important than art product. Fourth, artists, culture bearers, designers have many different kinds of critically important relationship with publics, and by extension, many possible ways of asserting as artists beyond the too few narrow paths that we've paved. And last, the arts are intrinsically valuable, period, full stop. At the same time, they're critical elements of other community dynamics, needs, and aspirations. So these things are not at odds with each other. Some of you know that while I've been working in the arts for more than 25 years, I've come at this from the base in urban planning and comprehensive community development, and it's been focused on justice, equity, and especially with a focus on historically marginalized communities. And I can say that that focus on the arts in those contexts wasn't always encouraged. Early in my career, I had many well-meaning colleagues say to me, "You care about poverty, racism, building good neighborhoods. Why are you doing this arts and culture stuff?" And they would ask me that as if I was off mission. And eventually I was able to respond, and what I've said for years is that if you look around the world and throughout the ages, in strategies to disempower, the first thing that is often tampered with is one's ability to make meaning, to ask questions, to dream, imagine, be expressive and creative on your own terms, connect to the divine, whatever that is conceived to be for you, connect to each other, the things that we do through art. So if we know that it is so important and powerful that it has to be contained or controlled to oppress, I continue to ask the question, why don't we understand it as core to building and strengthening? What I know for sure is that none of the things that we've said we aspire to as a nation of opportunity, none of those many proclamations that were made post the murder of George Floyd and attention to other abuses, none of those are possible or durable without understanding the role of the arts and related work. often as preconditions to the things that we say we want to achieve. So I don't need to preach to this audience about the power of the arts. The arts help us see things in new ways. They help us imagine different ways of being, recognize our humanity. They're necessary for us to do the work of repair and evolution. And they're essential to us, I think, essential to getting us unstuck. So it's through the arts that we're able to fully access our power to make change. We know that in order for people to experience a paradigmatic shift, they have to be engaged head, heart, hand, so intellectually, emotionally, physically, and there's science to back this up. For a breakthrough to happen, this is what's necessary, and that's what happens through the arts. The core ideas that I've been talking about, they undergird concepts and aspirations that I'm beginning to more intentionally animate at the NEA. So as I've traveled and spoken nationally and internationally in the last few months, I've been talking about the concept of artful lives and the importance of living lives full of art. It's an inclusive concept that it contains everything from the quotidian, sometimes non-professional, but deeply meaningful practices and expressions inherent in our diverse daily lived experiences and our opportunities for learning. It ranges from that to the making, presentation, and production of professional art that can be sublime and transcendent. It's that full spectrum. Another idea that I've been giving voice to is the importance of arts at the intersection of other fields. So I believe that unleashing the power of art requires not existing only in isolation or in a bubble. It requires animating work at the intersections of arts and education, health, community development, climate, and more. And it requires building what I call an arts-infused civic infrastructure. This is what I think of as the relationships and mechanisms that we rely on to care for each other. So these ideas are impacting how the NEA will be showing up. Of course, we will continue to be a funder and a grant-making organization, but we will also assert as a national resource for creating and bolstering healthy arts ecosystems that contribute to building communities where all people can thrive, where people can lead artful lives, and where the important work happening at the intersection of arts and other fields of policy and practice is advanced. So what does this mean specifically? As a national resource, the NEA will access all of the assets that it has at its disposal. So this includes grant money and financial resources for special initiatives, but it also will include leveraging its relationship to other federal agencies, the pulpit and bullhorn of the executive branch, the imprimatur of the federal government, the infrastructure of state arts organizations, regional arts organizations, and local arts agencies, as well as other networks. The view and analysis that we can render from a national perch, our ability to commission and conduct research, our ability to connect, convene communities of learning and practice, our ability to catalyze, amplify, and beyond. I've created 2 new positions at the NEA to help animate this approach. One is a senior advisor for partnerships, expansion, and innovation. The other is a chief strategy, programs, and equity officer to ensure alignment with different facets of the work and bolster accountability for impact. Related additional changes are to come, and these include other changes that also help us address underserved communities as well as the growing volume of interest in the NEA as the result of our American Rescue Plan work and related efforts, which has had broad reach. So there's more demand now than there has ever been, and I'm sure many of you are experiencing the same thing. It's important to note that we're not starting from scratch. Examples of precedents to build from include the work of the arts education team with its collective impacts focus, the work of the Our Town program with its field building efforts in collaboration with philanthropy and other organizations, the NEA Interagency Task Force on Human Development, and several initiatives at the intersection of arts and health, well-being, among others. And recently, I want to share with you some developments that I think bode well for this orientation. So, as many of you know, one of President Biden's first actions was to issue an all-government executive order on racial equity and support for underserved communities. So this has required all federal agencies, including the NEA, to bolster efforts to advance equity, inclusion, diversity, and report on progress on a regular basis. And in my mind's eye, at its best, this isn't just about creating extra temporary initiatives to check boxes. At its best, I think at this time when we're called to question our orthodoxies, our work needs to be about using all of the resources available to the organization as it goes about removing barriers and taking into account the impacts of historic disparities as well as the structural sources of inequity. Over the summer, the Biden administration stood up a new initiative called United We Stand, taking action to prevent and address hate-motivated violence and foster unity. So this is not an executive order, but it's an all-government initiative involving tending to the aftermath of such horrific events. And it also focuses on prevention. So the NEA and the NEH were invited to participate in this initiative alongside other agencies like Homeland Security, Department of Justice, Education, Health and Human Services, Treasury, AmeriCorps, IMLS, it's the Institute for Museum and Library Services, and others. And this effort creates a call for what NEH Chair Shelley Lowe and I were already discussing prior to this initiative, which is what is the role of the arts and humanities in creating more just and humane communities? What is the work at the local level and at the national levels? And again, work on what I call bolstering this arts-infused civic infrastructure. Most recently, the president issued another all-government executive order, and this was just last week. And this was recognizing the contributions of the arts and humanities, our cultural vitality, not only in economic terms, and I think this is important, that's still a good argument, but not only in economic terms, but also in terms of the contributions to health, well-being of the nation, and on the future of democracy itself. This executive order focused on advancing arts, humanities, libraries, and museums as strategic elements in a wide range of federal aims and directs other agencies to enter into partnerships with the NEA, NEH, and IMLS. The executive order also resurrects the President's Committee on Arts and Humanities. So to date, even before this executive order, I have been having promising conversations with other federal agencies and entities about possible partnerships, including the Department of Transportation, the Office of the Surgeon General, and Housing and Urban Development. Most recently, we signed an agreement with the General Services Administration, or GSA, and this is for a collaboration on their Arts and Architecture program, which requires that 0.5% of new construction, of modernization or new construction, that those resources be allocated for art commissions within federal properties. So this year, $3.4 billion are going into construction under GSA, which amount to about $17 million available for art commissions between now and 2026. So the NEA will work with GSA to help bolster greater access to commissioning opportunities for artists, especially making sure that artists from underserved communities are considered and can participate. It doesn't increase our bottom line, but it is an example of how the resources in other agencies can be leveraged and influenced in support of what we want to see. So again, recently we launched what we're calling now the Equity Pilot. This is another initiative with our regional arts organizations, specifically with Art South, or South Arts, and I know Susie Circumer's here, saw her a little while ago. But we're very excited about this. This is still in co-creation. The initiative will help animate the concept of healthy arts ecosystems. And this initiative will focus on advancing the work of organizations that can help us increase access to arts opportunities for underserved populations through systemic investments that are durable. Our work is still evolving, but we know that it will have some impact on local arts agencies and helping them to show up in ways that advance artful lives, that inclusive big tent idea, and work effectively at intersections, among other things that it will do. So there are other efforts underway to expand the Mayor's Institute on City Design, and this is a relationship with, oh, they're fans of the Mayor's Institute on City Design, that's good. But this is a partnership with the U.S. Conference of Mayors and also the Institute on the Citizens Institute on Rural Design, with an eye, again, towards this arts-infused civic infrastructure. And there's attention also to next generation leadership development efforts, especially through HBCUs, Hispanic serving institutions, and with tribal colleges and governments. That's on the horizon, and we're eager to have conversations with people from those communities to help us shape those programs. There's more, but these are some things that I'm able to share with you currently, things that are underway as we speak. At our best, I think all of us, understand the advantages and limitations of our respective perches, and we think strategically about what we can do from where we sit. At our best, we're clear about what we can and need to make durable, what we seed and hopefully see grow beyond our control, and what we know is just for the season. I believe that the NEA can't do its best work without open channels of communication with you and the benefit of your experience, your perspectives, and your reach. Our viable collaboration, our active and ongoing ability to share insights, adjust, and coordinate is essential, and I believe this to my core. And I'm grateful to be able to share this direction in these areas of work with you. I feel very blessed to be among colleagues that appreciate the continuous process of learning and adapting as we go. I'm excited about what we can do together, seizing what opportunities are available to us in a complicated time, and mindful of the challenges ahead. I'm deeply inspired by all of you, your fellowship, and a window into what is possible. So with that, I thank you. And I think that there are pieces of paper you all can fill out. Post-its is what I was going to say. Post-its if there are questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair Jackson, and I am beyond honored to be up here in conversation with you, and also a little nervous, and I'll just not only because there's like 100 people in person for the first time in 2 years, but when I first started working in philanthropy, you were already a celebrity. I mean, you were somebody whose work in research, urban planning, and evaluation was shaping so much of the work that we were doing at the Nathan Cummings Foundation and across the field. So I'm having like a fan moment right now as well. So I just wanted to own that. And just thank you for being here with us for this conference.
Well, thank
it's really
you,
meaningful.
Brandi, thank you. That was so sweet of you. And I'm so proud to be sitting here with you. I am.
Well, we're going to jump in.
Okay.
I know we've got I could sit here and talk about all sorts of stuff all day, but want to get into some of the questions. The first, you talked about the work that you've been doing with other federal agencies to unlock arts opportunities, which is really inspiring. As you work horizontally across the government, are you able to see how arts funders, both public and private, might have a role to play in helping these new opportunities come to life?
Yes, yes. I think there are some interesting things that you can do from the federal government perch, and there I am finding and learning. There are a lot of things you can't do from the federal government perch. So understanding where philanthropy can lead in ways that we can't, and learning, trying to understand what the puzzle is, and how we are pieces of a puzzle that we're trying to complete, I think is really important. In terms of specific things, I mean, there are so many different kinds of foundations, right? From national foundations to community foundations, and they all operate somewhat differently. There are some that are really proximate to the communities that we want to see thrive, and I think that they, with that proximity, have a particular role and set of insights that we could really learn from. There are things that we can do at the federal level, I hope, that can make things easier in terms of flow of resources, in terms of access to programs and opportunities at the local level. So that work of toggling between levels and coordination of what can be opened up at the federal level and how it can land at the local level, if you want to look at it from that perspective, is really important. But then the opposite way is true too, right? How do we develop the mechanisms to learn about the things that are working at the local level so that we can do more at the national level to make sure that that can continue to happen? So there's something about that toggling between levels, and it's an intermediary function in a way, right, that allows for maximum impact at its best.
I appreciate that when we were talking a little bit before, we were talking about the importance of an ecosystem and sort of recognizing the different roles that within philanthropy we're all playing from our respective perches. And so figuring out how to open up those channels for more aligned partnership and collaboration, or just movement, feels really critical, particularly at this time. Another question we've got: many arts funders changed their practices in response to the pandemic and the racial reckoning. Do you have advice for funder practices moving forward?
That's a big one.
Yeah.
That's a big one. You know, the advice would be, it goes back to that discernment, because there are instances where, of course, things should change because you know better, or you know differently, or you see things better or more clearly. And I think that there are instances, though, where some funders really should stick with what they've been doing if it's been affirmed that that is what is needed. Yeah. So I think the introspection and the learning is not negotiable. What happens as a result of that needs to be measured, right? And it needs to not be just gratuitous. Not just change for the sake of change. If you're clearly getting signs that what is needed is what has been. Yeah. That said, there has to be enough appetite and curiosity about what could be different to move one to question what should be next. So I'm not in any way advocating inertia, but I'm giving folks credit for having gotten it before this maybe, and affirming what you knew. You know, I've had, as you know, have had a career in research, and sometimes it's frustrating because people want to commission a study on this and a study on that, and you know, whatever. And it's like, okay, we know this. There are things that we know. There really are. There are things that we know, and we have to be honest about when it's about procrastination, or it's about putting something off, or there are fairly painless and easy ways to test things with validity that doesn't require another 2 years of waiting. You know, so I think we have to own what we know, not in an arrogant way without questioning it. But there is something about keeping with things that we know are long-term commitments and have to be. And there is something about changing that's healthy too. But the discernment to know when to do what is what we're called to summon.
You were speaking earlier about the commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion. We had an incredible keynote earlier today from NDN, and a really beautiful way and powerful way to honor Indigenous Peoples Day. And I'm curious if you could speak to the relationship between the NEA and Indigenous peoples, Native Americans, artists, and communities of the U.S. and across Turtle Island.
Yeah, I think we have to do more. Without question, I think we have to do more. I think there are some practices afoot that are gaining steam and are important. One of them has to do with tribal consultations. And yeah, and we want to be able to do that with integrity and in a way that leads to impactful work that makes sense for the communities that are supposed to benefit from them. So I think getting that right is really important. I'm really interested in, alongside work related to HBCUs and Hispanic serving institutions, work that might be possible with tribal colleges as we think about next generation. And not just next generation in terms of arts and arts administrators, but next generation in terms of people implicated in that arts-infused civic infrastructure, which is bigger, right? So I'm excited about that. Last week, I was in Mexico City for a UNESCO meeting. It was called Mondia Cult, and we're not a paid member right now, but we were still allowed to participate. And as part of those meetings, there were bilateral and trilateral meetings. And the bilateral meetings were focused in some ways on the bicentennial of the U.S.-Mexico diplomatic relations, right? So it's a thing, and it's going to be celebrated with some fanfare. There is also going to be a trilateral meeting and recognition of the North American continental relationships among U.S., Canada, and Mexico. And in the trilateral conversation, the thing, not surprisingly, that came up that all three countries had in common was a concern for how to do better with the indigenous communities. So there are these are the things that are interesting now from this purge, is that you catch wind of these big things that are going on, and you try to figure out how does that create more opportunity for the things that we've been waiting to do. So I'm hopeful that that becomes something that puts some more wind in our sails in an effort to address indigenous communities, that there are things that are happening in the macro environment that could be, one could tether to in ways that give us some more energy there.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us. When you think about the cultural ecosystem in the U.S., what networks of support would you like to see either strengthened or created that don't already exist?
You know, the networks of support, I think unpacking what we mean by support is an important exercise, not right this second in this conversation, but unpacking what we mean by support. Of course, that means money, yes, but what else could it mean? I think unpacking support and then looking at both informal and formal networks, and from a philanthropy perspective or a funding perspective, being willing to take both of those seriously is a challenge, but I think it's important, right? Yeah. So I think that there are networks that have to do with learning and advancing different kinds of practices. I think there are networks that have to do with identifying opportunities for change. And these may be the same or they may be different. But there are some functions that I think are necessary that can get played out through networks. Learning is one. Opportunity spotting, perhaps, is another. Building next generation of people who will continue the work or modify the work as they need to. There are these functions that we have to pay attention to that can't be tended to by one organization exclusively. So I think looking at networks in relation to functions, I don't know if that's too out there, but does that make sense? Yeah. I would want to look in that direction as we think about how to invest in networks.
The public sector is actually the fastest growing membership of GIA.
Oh, good.
Yeah. What do you see as the role of public funders and local arts agencies in moving our work forward?
I think they'll bring a different perspective with, again, a different set of limitations and opportunities in terms of what they can do. And with more of that kind of diversity in the network, I think how we conceive of what the puzzle is can be sharper, right? So if there are opportunities through GIA or adjacent entities to have those conversations where one can think long-term and understand, again, what's possible from the different perches where we sit, that's exciting. The ability, not necessarily, it's not about, you know, handcuffs or walking in full lockstep, but at least being aware enough of what others are doing and recognizing where there can be important synergy or at least not harm done, you know. I won't say to eliminate redundancy, because sometimes redundancy is healthy. Right, if it's intentional or if it is organized in a way that actually has good payoff, redundancy can, you know, planes are redundant for good reason. So I'm not an enemy of well thought out, reasoned redundancy, but there have to be these forums where people can have safe conversations about how they work and who they need in what positions to do what. And I think if that kind of additional diversity is coming into the membership, there's greater opportunity to strategize.
You talked earlier about the partnership with regional arts agencies, South Arts, and just more broadly, is the NEA thinking about continuing to do regranting, working with intermediary partners, working with other partners to do regranting work?
So I think that because we have a national perch and don't have the proximity that, say, local funders or funders that are very place-based are, the state arts agencies, the regional arts organizations, and others that have a different kind of proximity are really important. I mean, that's built into our formula of funding, right, in terms of state arts agencies and regional arts organizations. So they're I think, animating that infrastructure in a way where cross-learning is more possible, where there's a two-way exchange of information around what we can do at the national level that can be helpful, what's necessary at state and regional levels that could be helpful as well. Again, understanding how to work from where you sit, that will continue to be part of how we work, in part because of how we're legally set up. But I think even if we weren't legally set up that way, there is value to having partners at different scales and with different kinds of reach, right?
Yeah.
So that proximity, the proximity is really important to do good work.
We've got this incredible room of colleagues here coming from a number of different perspectives philanthropically. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about how we can support your vision?
Again, I think I'm so honored to be sitting here with you all and to count you all as colleagues, to know the goodwill that is in the room is really important. And as I said in my remarks, I think open channels of communication are really important. I think the ability to ask each other, what do you need, as you're doing now, but with the opportunity to answer in really specific ways that have to do with particular pieces of work that are important that we're trying to move forward. So keeping those lines of communication open, I think, is really valuable. I think also figuring out, particularly now when there's a need to at times take a beat and figure out what are we supposed to be learning from all of this that we've been experiencing. Partnership in that. You know, how do we give ourselves the opportunity to take a beat and do better? And how do we create the mechanisms that we need as a learning community to be able to support each other in doing that? I think those are things that come to mind when you ask that question, Brandi.
I've got one more question. I've got
Yeah.
questions coming in on paper and text and all sorts of stuff. So shout out to the GIA team for using tech really effectively.
This is a high-tech production, huh?
Yes, it is. It is in real time. How can initiatives you create extend beyond your term? And what can the field do?
That's a great question. That's one thing that I'm very conscious of. You know, these positions, the perch that I have right now, is not eternal. It comes with a very prescribed duration. And understanding what can and hopefully will be durable within a federal system is really important. What can be seeded and grow from something that maybe doesn't last forever, but was what it was, whether it was an incubator or whether it was a pilot or some precedent that could be adopted or adapted. I think it's important to stay on each other's radar and pay attention to what doesn't work, but also pay attention to what does work, and be willing to take it up, right? So if there is something that is valuable, that is impactful, that is precarious, maybe because it is impactful and valuable, that it can move, that there is enough agility within the field to take it, and have it thrive somewhere else. So, you know, even creating things with an eye towards that possibility, or knowing that that is there and available, that's incredibly important when working from a perch like this. Yeah.
Wonderful. We are at time. We could sit up here and continue for some time, but I just want to thank you so much for the insight, for your generous spirit and invitation, for partnership and thinking about this community as an ecosystem.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And